He mocked me for taking the bus, loud enough for the whole block to hear. Marjorie Clark, retired secretary and single mother for 40 years, didn't argue. Alan, the neighbor who once asked me for grocery money, chuckled like my life would always stay small. 7 years later, the limousine door swung open, and I stepped onto the same sidewalk he used to laugh from. I'd been both overlooked and underestimated. Now I was the woman with keys to more than just a bus pass. And when his smirk vanished in the chrome reflection, Alan finally realized who'd really arrived. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. The bus doors closed behind me, but his laughter echoed in my mind. The hiss of the closing doors still clung to her ears as Kate stepped down onto the cracked pavement. The summer air was thick with exhaust, and her flats slapped against the concrete as she adjusted the strap of her worn tote. Another long day at the office behind her. She reminded herself, as always, that taking the bus wasn't failure. It was independence. The city was alive, humming with neon and chatter. On Main Street, she slowed her pace when the sound of laughter spilled from a cafe. Through the wide glass window, warm light painted a group of friends leaning over their drinks. Among them sat a face she knew too well. Jay. Even from across the street, his presence struck her like an old bruise pressed too hard. 7 years had passed since high school, but the swagger hadn't aged. His hair was sharper, his shirt crisp, but the smirk, lazy, self-satisfied, was the same. He leaned back in his chair, arms spread like he owned the night. His gaze snapped to her, and recognition spread across his face. Then came the grin. "Well, look who it is," he called, loud enough to cut through traffic. "Still taking the bus after all these years?" The people at his table laughed, some glancing out at her with curious amusement. Heat rushed up Kate's neck. Jake lifted his glass in a mock salute. "Guess some things never change." Her stomach nodded, but she kept walking, head high, steps steady. She didn't give him the pause he wanted, though his words sank deeper with every stride. By the time she turned the corner, his laughter still clung to her like static. The walk to her apartment stretched longer than usual. The street lamps buzzed overhead, and the city noise thinned as she reached her block. Unlocking the door, she stepped into the hush of her small living room. One lamp cast a soft glow over the second-hand couch and cluttered coffee table. It was home, but tonight it felt smaller than ever. She set her tote down and stood there, motionless, until the silence pressed too hard. The humiliation replayed itself. Jake's voice, the way his friends chuckled, the smug certainty that she was the same girl he remembered, stuck predictable, small. Kate sat at her dining table, pulled a notebook closer, and stared at the blank page. The pen trembled in her hand until she scrawled the vow forming in her chest. "I will prove them wrong. I'll show them I can do more." She whispered the words aloud, surprising herself with their steadiness. Her laptop glowed as she opened it. Tabs filled quickly. Community college programs, evening classes, career guides she had once dismissed as out of reach. The possibilities felt terrifying, but they were hers. By midnight, determination had replaced the sting of embarrassment. She logged into her bank account. The numbers were meager, but her hands moved anyway, clicking through the prompts. She named the new account carefully, almost reverently, Dream Fund. The screen refreshed. Balance, 000 zeros. And for the first time that day, Kate smiled. It wasn't nothing, it was a beginning. Kate opens a savings account and starts setting aside money to pursue a new dream. It was a small step, but it felt like the start of something big. The classroom smelled faintly of dry erase markers and overused carpet, a far cry from the sleek offices Kate had always imagined herself working in. Still, as she slid into the plastic chair near the back, a quiet sense of pride hummed through. After long days of spreadsheets and supervisors who barely remembered her name, these evening classes were hers. Paid for with her own money, built from her own vow. She opened her notebook, its first page already filled with neat bullet points from the syllabus. Around her, students shuffled in, some younger, some older, all carrying their own version of hope. Kate kept her head down, not eager to make friends. This wasn't about chatter or validation. This was about direction. At work her days hadn't changed. She was still the one her boss passed over for promotions, still the one colleagues assumed would stay late without complaint. But something was different inside her. She didn't mind fading into the background anymore, not when she knew her evenings were filled with Her friends texted sometimes, asking why she wasn't free on weeknights anymore. She kept her answers vague. She wasn't ready to explain, not yet. Her dreams felt fragile, like a flame she needed to guard until it was strong enough to stand against the wind. Still, doubt crept in. The coursework wasn't easy. Some nights she stared at the textbook, overwhelmed by charts and strategies that felt like a foreign language. There were evenings she almost convinced herself Jake was right, that she'd never break free of the bus routes and the small apartment. But then she'd open her journal, the one where she wrote every thought that bubbled too close to despair. On the page, she reminded herself why she had started. The sting of Jake's laughter, the echo of his words, the vow she had whispered into her quiet apartment. I'll prove them wrong. She began to notice changes in herself. In class, when the professor asked questions, she dared to raise her hand. At work, though her boss overlooked her, she listened more intently in meetings, filing away every detail about strategy and leadership. She started networking in subtle ways. After class, she lingered near the bulletin board, where internship flyers hung, pulling one down now and then to study at home. Online, she joined forums and discussion groups, watching how professionals spoke, what they valued. Every new piece of knowledge felt like one more brick in the foundation she was quietly building. Some nights were brutal. After a full day in the office, she'd drag herself to class, then home to study until her eyes blurred. She'd collapse into bed past midnight, only to rise before dawn and start again. Her reflection in the mirror often looked worn, shadows under her eyes betraying the fatigue. But behind the exhaustion was something new: purpose. She didn't tell anyone who might mock her for dreaming too big. This was hers alone for now. A seed she planted in silence, determined to protect it until it grew into something undeniable. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of her new life solidified. Work, study, plan, write, save. It was relentless, but each step felt like proof that the flame inside her hadn't gone out. One late afternoon, she stayed after class to talk to the professor about a project. He listened, then gave her a small smile. You've got potential. If you keep pushing, doors will open. She walked out into the night with the words clinging to her warmer than the streetlights overhead. For once the city around her didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a map. Kate's first real breakthrough. She's offered an internship at a respected firm in her field. The desk was small, but it felt like the biggest opportunity of my life. The surface barely fit her laptop and a notepad, but Kate sat at it like it was a throne. Her heart thudded as she typed her first official email under the letterhead of the prestigious marketing agency she had only dreamed of joining. The office buzzed around her, phones ringing, printers humming, colleagues striding past in tailored blazers that whispered success. She straightened in her chair, smoothing her skirt, trying to absorb it all without looking out of place, but the nerves clung stubbornly. Every time she glanced at the glass-walled conference rooms, she wondered if someone would tap her shoulder and say they'd made a mistake, that she didn't belong here. Her internship supervisor didn't waste time. A thick folder landed on her desk before the hour was. Organize these, he said briskly, already halfway back to his office. She swallowed her nerves and got to work. The first week blurred into a crash course of deadlines, coffee runs, and frantic note-taking. By Friday she'd memorized which printer jammed the least and which managers were worth impressing, but it was in the second week that she met Lisa. Lisa was sharp-eyed, mid-40s, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned her place in every room she entered. When she stopped at Kate's desk, Kate braced for criticism. Instead, Lisa asked, "Do you have ideas, or are you just following instructions?" Kate blinked. "Ideas," she said, though her voice wavered. "Good," Lisa replied. "Bring me one by Monday." That weekend, Kate sat hunched at her dining table, sketching notes across napkins and notebooks. She thought about the clients the agency had, the campaigns she'd studied, the subtle trends she'd picked up. By Monday morning she handed Lisa a typed one-page. Lisa read it slowly, lips twitching into a half-smile. "Not bad," she said. "We'll talk more." For the first time, Kate felt like more than a seat filler. The following weeks were grueling, but exhilarating. She stayed late to refine strategies, offering small suggestions during team meetings. At first, they went unnoticed. Then, one suggestion sparked conversation. Another was adopted. By the third, Lisa gestured toward Kate and said, "She's onto something." That moment ignited her. When the agency launched a campaign that drew unexpected attention online, Kate had been part of the brainstorming team. She wasn't credited publicly, but she knew she'd left fingerprints on something bigger than herself. Meanwhile, Jake's presence lurked in the background. He still posted smug updates on social media, photos of nights out, casual jabs slipped into comments whenever he noticed her online. Still riding buses, must be nice fetching coffee. She never responded, but the sting sharpened her focus. Her world was shifting, even if he couldn't see it. Industry events soon became part of her calendar. At first, she hovered near the edges, clutching water glasses and listening to others' trade jargon. But slowly, she introduced herself, shook hands, took business cards. She practiced holding eye contact until it felt natural. Late one evening, Kate stood by her tiny desk, papers stacked neatly, city lights glowing through the window beyond. She thought about the girl she had been months earlier, staring at a blank notebook and typing Dream Fund into a bank website. Now she was here, in a place she had once only dared to imagine. She wasn't finished. She was just beginning. At a company event, Kate runs into Jake unexpectedly, but he doesn't recognize her at first. He had no idea who I was, yet his voice still carried that same condescension. The ballroom glowed under chandeliers, the air thick with chatter and the clink of glasses. Kate smoothed her dress nervously, scanning the rows of booths and networking circles at the annual marketing event. This was the kind of place she used to imagine from a distance, scrolling through LinkedIn posts and magazine spreads. Now she was here, badge clipped to her neckline, agency name printed clearly beneath hers. She adjusted the strap of her bag and moved toward a display table stacked with glossy brochures. That's when she heard it. A laugh that sliced clean through the room's noise. Her stomach tightened. He stood a few feet away, gesturing animatedly at a group of attendees, his voice as familiar as it was irritating. He hadn't changed his tone. It still carried that effortless arrogance, as though every space belonged to him the moment he stepped into it. Kate's pulse quickened. She hoped he wouldn't notice her. But fate wasn't interested in granting favors. He turned, eyes sweeping casually across the crowd. For a moment, his gaze slid over her as if she were just another face among dozens. Relief rushed through her, until he took a second glance. Confusion flickered, then recognition sparked. Kate? His tone carried disbelief, as though the idea of her belonging here was absurd. She steadied her breath, keeping her expression neutral. Jake, for a beat, he didn't connect the dots. He treated her like any other attendee, asking what brought her here, assuming she was another newcomer grasping for opportunities. His words dripped with the same subtle superiority he had wielded back in high school, the same tone that once left her small and embarrassed. But tonight, something was different. Kate wasn't the girl stepping off the bus under his laughter anymore. She was standing in a room she had earned her way into, surrounded by peers who respected her, and she wasn't about to shrink. When the realization finally dawned on him, his posture shifted. His confident smirk faltered just slightly. "Wait, you work here, at this agency?" "Yes," Kate said simply, her chin lifting. The silence stretched a beat too long, discomfort flickering in his eye. He fumbled for small talk, suddenly less steady. "That's impressive. Really, you've come a long way." "Have I?" Her voice was calm, but steady, deliberate. They exchanged polite pleasantries after that, though Jake's composure had cracked. He tried to offer his number, suggesting they catch up sometime, but Kate wasn't fooled. The gesture wasn't friendship. It was recognition. He had underestimated her, and now he was scrambling to keep pace. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "I think I'll pass." Something cold flickered across his expression, though he covered it quickly with another weak grin. But Kate had already turned away, her heart steady and unshaken. Kate, in a bold move, Informs Jake she now works at a higher position at the agency. Jake froze mid-step, processing the words. The smug veneer drained from his face, replaced by something unfamiliar: discomfort. Maybe even shame. For once he had no clever comeback. Kate didn't linger. She didn't need to. The power had shifted. And she knew it. Jake's expression freezes as he processes the realization. The office was small, but the work felt like the foundation of something huge. The four walls weren't impressive. Beige paint, humming fluorescent lights, and a desk that looked like it had been dragged out of storage. But Kate sat in that office with her nameplate freshly mounted on the door, and for her it was proof. Proof that she had climbed one rung higher, and that her fight to rise above the echoes of old laughter was paying off. Her new role demanded long hours, deadlines stacked high, clients wanted answers yesterday, and her phone buzzed until she silenced it each night. The fatigue was real, but for the first time, exhaustion came with rewards: recognition from her boss, respect from colleagues who once overlooked the kind of financial stability she used to daydream about while staring at her dwindling checking account balance. Kate threw herself into the work, thriving on the validation that followed, and yet something stirred beneath the surface, an itch to create something entirely her own. At night her apartment transformed. The dining table became command central, covered in notebooks, colored pens, and her humming laptop. That's where she drafted the skeleton of a side business, a personal branding consultancy. She began with one client, a contact she had met at a networking mixer. The work was small, almost experimental, but it clicked. Soon another client followed, and then another, each one validating her instincts. Her reputation started to stretch beyond the office wall. A satisfied client shared her name with colleagues. A social media post praising her advice caught unexpected traction. People began reaching out to her directly, eager to work with her. Kate no longer felt like she was simply chasing her boss's approval. She was building something that belonged only to her. The growth didn't come without risk. Kate spent carefully, reinvesting her extra income. She purchased design software, hired a freelance assistant for projects, and registered her business under a proper name. Every dollar she risked was a test of her faith in herself, and every time, the return justified the gamble. It wasn't only money that grew, it was her sense of freedom. She no longer feared the bus rides, the tight budgets, or Jake's mocking voice haunting her nights. Now she walked into meetings with her shoulders back. She had choices. She had control. Her consultancy clients listened when she spoke, and her agency colleagues leaned in when she shared her ideas. Success at last was no longer abstract. It was tangible, measurable in respect, in income, in opportunities that once felt untouchable. Still, she never let the victories make her arrogant. She remembered the sting of that night outside the cafe, the feeling of smallness she had sworn she'd never feel again. She remembered long evenings spent searching for classes, and the trembling moment when she clicked open account on the Dream Fund. The memory of those humble beginnings kept her grounded, even as her influence expanded. Her days blurred into a rhythm of corporate strategy and entrepreneurial hustle. Some nights, she collapsed into bed too tired to move. But even in exhaustion, she felt alive. She wasn't just moving forward, she was building. Then one afternoon, as she sifted through her email inbox, a subject line leapt out at her. Kate receives an invitation to speak at an exclusive marketing conference. It wasn't just an invitation, it was validation. The email subject line glowed on Kate's laptop screen, the words crisp and unbelievable: invitation to speak, National Marketing Leaders Conference. Her breath caught as she read the body of the message, each sentence confirming what her racing pulse already knew. They wanted her name, her story on their stage. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. For years she had been the invisible one in the office, the one overlooked at meetings, the one mocked on the sidewalk for riding the bus. Now leaders she had once admired from a distance were inviting her to stand beside them. Overwhelm washed through her almost immediately. The conference wasn't just another event, it was the event. An annual gathering, where the sharpest minds in marketing traded ideas and set the direction of the industry. Thousands of eyes would be on her. What if she stumbled? What if she didn't measure up? Kate closed her laptop before panic could spiral further. She pressed her palms to the table and whispered to herself, You've worked for this. You've earned this. The next morning, she opened a fresh notebook and began to draft ideas. Her speech couldn't just be about strategies or trends. It had to be about her journey, the struggles that shaped her, the nights spent studying after endless workdays, the humiliations that fueled her determination. She wrote bullet after bullet, then scratched them out, searching for the core truth she wanted to share. Days blurred into nights, her apartment filled with scattered index cards, sticky notes taped to walls, and the sound of her own voice practicing aloud. Yet, despite the preparation, doubt clung to her like a shadow. That's when Lisa called. Her mentor's voice was steady, grounding as it had been since the internship. "You're ready, Kate," she said firmly. "Don't water down your story. People need to hear it, unpolished and real. That's where your strength lies." Kate nodded, even though Lisa couldn't see her. "I'm afraid of sounding self-congratulatory." Lisa chuckled softly. "Sharing your victories isn't bragging, it's proof of resilience. Own it. You've earned the right to stand tall." When the conference day arrived, the auditorium lights nearly blinded her as she walked onto the stage. For a heartbeat, the sea of faces blurred into one overwhelming presence. She gripped the podium to steady herself. Then she remembered the notebook words she had scrawled weeks ago. "Prove them wrong. Show them you can do more." Her voice wavered at first, then found its rhythm. She told them about the girl who had taken the bus home in humiliation, about the nights spent with only a notebook and a dream fund with nothing but zeros, about perseverance that felt thankless until it suddenly didn't. She spoke of triumph not as a finish line, but as a journey, a relentless series of steps, taken despite exhaustion, doubt, and derision. And as she spoke, the faces in the audience shifted. They leaned in, they nodded, they understood. When the applause came, it thundered through her chest. People crowded her afterward, executives offering cards, students thanking her for her honesty, peers telling her she had inspired them. Kate walked away from the stage, not just validated, but transformed. It wasn't the applause that mattered most. It was the realization that her story had weight, that it could carry others, not just herself. For the first time, success didn't feel like a private victory over humiliation. It felt like something she could give away, and still keep for herself. That night, back in her hotel room, her phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. She froze when she saw the sender's name. After the conference, Kate receives a surprise message from Jake, asking to meet. His face was pale. He had no idea what to say to me now. Kate sat at a corner table of the cafe, fingers wrapped loosely around a mug of coffee she'd barely touched. The place was bright, buzzing with quiet conversations and the hiss of the espresso machine. She'd chosen this spot deliberately. Not too crowded, not too intimate, neutral ground. When Jake walked in, his confidence was gone. His steps faltered when his eyes landed on her, and the color drained from his face. For once he didn't have a smirk ready. He slid into the chair across from her, clearing his throat like words were lodged there. I wanted to say I'm sorry," he began, his voice uneven. "For back then, for mocking you, I was immature, cruel." Kate raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent. She let him twist in the pause, waiting to see where he would go. He shifted in his seat, fingers tapping against his coffee cup. "I thought I had everything figured out, but I didn't. Things didn't exactly work out the way I planned." His eyes flicked to hers, searching for sympathy. There was none. She nodded slightly, but her face stayed composed. "I've been struggling," he admitted finally. "My job, well, I lost it last year, and I'm trying to get back on track, but it's tough, really tough." Kate sipped her coffee, the bitter taste grounding her. She remembered the sting of his laughter years ago, how deeply it had cut. Now, hearing the cracks in his voice, she felt no satisfaction, just clarity. He leaned forward quickly, as if to cover his vulnerability. "But you've done amazing. I've seen the articles, the posts, the conference speech. You're incredible, Kate." His smile was thin, brittle. Compliments layered over envy. She saw through it immediately. The words weren't admiration. They were a mask for jealousy he couldn't hide. "Thanks," she said simply, offering nothing more. He hurried on. "Listen, I've still got some connections. If you ever need introductions, I can." Kate cut him off with a soft shake of her head. "No, I don't need them. I've gotten this far without you." The finality in her tone made him flinch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clinking of dishes and low hum of chatter filled the space instead. Their conversation limped along after that, tense and uneven. Jake tried jokes that fell flat, stories that sounded like excuses. Kate listened, but her mind was elsewhere. She saw the contrast between them, as stark as the table that separated their cups. She had grown into someone with direction, and he had stalled, still scrambling for footing. His vulnerability showed through the cracks in his voice, and the restless movement of his hands. He was no longer the boy who mocked her with easy laughter. He was a man unsettled, haunted by choices he couldn't undo. But Kate didn't soften. She couldn't. She had worked too hard, clawed too far to let the past blur her vision of the future. Finally, Jake leaned back, defeated, his eyes tired. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing at him since he'd sat down. Jake asks, "Do you ever regret not having us by your side?" Kate's response leaves him speechless. "It wasn't the limo, it was the journey that got me here." The leather seats smelled of newness, the polished surface reflecting the city lights as they slid across the window. Kate leaned back, fingertips grazing the stitching, and thought about how far she'd come. The limousine wasn't the dream, it was just a symbol. The real victory was the road that led her here, every mile paved by sacrifice and persistence. Her business had expanded beyond her wildest plan. What began as a side project at her dining table was now a fully registered firm with clients in multiple states. Each week brought fresh contracts, glowing reviews, and word-of-mouth referrals that kept her calendar full. She no longer worried about whether she belonged in the room, she was often the one invited to lead it. The first time she slid the keys of a luxury car into her palm, she hesitated. The gleaming machine in the dealership represented something bigger than convenience. It was proof of her effort made tangible. She drove it home that night, the hum of the engine like applause under her hands. Her story caught fire online. Clients praised her openly. Her social media posts gained traction, and articles began highlighting her as one to watch in the personal branding space. People who once scrolled past her now stopped to read, to share, to comment about her resilience. She wasn't just succeeding, she was inspiring. The media followed quickly. Local news ran a segment on her journey, then industry blogs reached out for interviews. Soon, bigger publications added her name to lists of rising entrepreneurs. At events, strangers approached her with genuine admiration, thanking her for telling a story that sounded a little like their own. Kate learned to move through these high-profile events with poise. She stepped out of sleek cars into flashes of cameras, shook hands with executives, and spoke on panels with leaders she once admired from afar. Respect now met her before she spoke, her reputation preceding her into every room. Jake's calls dwindled with time. At first he reached out often, always with thinly veiled compliments or clumsy attempts at connection. But as her name spread wider, his tone grew strained, the jealousy tucked between his words more obvious. Eventually the calls stopped altogether. Pride wouldn't let him continue chasing someone who had outgrown him so completely. Kate noticed, but didn't dwell. She had little interest in his approval or resentment. Her focus remained firmly on her work. With success came new responsibilities, managing employees, balancing growth with quality, and planning for the future. Yet even in the chaos, she reveled in her independence. No supervisor hovered over her, no paycheck dictated her limits. She was free. Her wealth allowed her security she had once only imagined. No more counting change at the grocery store. No more sleepless nights over rent. She could invest in herself, in her business, and in comfort without guilt. Still, she reminded herself often of the vow she had whispered years ago, in the silence of her apartment. Humility grounded her, keeping her connected to the journey rather than the trappings of it. The limo was a later decision, less necessity and more strategy. She hired a professional driver, understanding that her presence at events mattered. Arriving in style elevated her image, reinforcing the narrative of success she had built. When she stepped out of the car, cameras followed, doors opened, conversations began differently. And yet even seated in the back of that car with city lights flickering across her reflection, she reminded herself it wasn't the limo, it was everything it represented. The nights of exhaustion, the risks, the endless belief that she could be. One crisp evening, as the limo slowed in front of a grand hotel hosting a high-profile gala, Kate gathered her composure. Outside, a red carpet gleamed under camera flashes. Her driver opened the door, and she stepped out gracefully, the hum of voices rising around her. Then her breath caught. Standing just a few feet away, stiff in his suit, was Jake, his face drained of color the instant he saw her. At a high-profile event, Kate steps out of the limo, and Jake is there. His face turns white. He saw me step out of that limo, and for the first time, he understood what he'd lost. The hotel's entrance glowed with golden light as the limousine rolled to a stop. Cameras flashed along the red carpet, capturing every arrival. When Kate stepped out, her gown shimmering under the bulbs, a hush rippled through the crowd closest to her. Heads turned, eyes lingered, not because of the car but because of the quiet assurance she carried in her stride. From a distance, Jake froze. He hadn't expected her here, certainly not like this. The woman stepping onto the carpet bore little resemblance to the girl he had mocked for climbing off a bus. Her presence was magnetic, poised, confident, untouchable, and for the first time, his laughter, his arrogance failed him. Summoning courage he didn't feel, Jake moved closer. The swagger that once defined him had drained away, leaving only hesitation in his steps. When he finally reached her, his voice cracked slightly. "Kate," he said, "you look incredible." Kate turned to face him, her expression calm, as she had seen this moment coming, though perhaps not here, not now. Her heart didn't race. Her palms didn't sweat. Instead, she felt a quiet certainty, the kind that only comes when you've already won the battle inside yourself. Jake fumbled, glancing at the cameras before lowering his voice. "I wanted to apologize again, for everything, for how I treated you back then." His eyes darted to hers, searching for mercy. "I wasn't fair, I was cruel, and I regret it." This time his words held weight. There was no mocking tone, no half-smile to soften the blow of his arrogance. He looked smaller, humbled, stripped of the bravado he had always worn like armor. Kate studied him for a moment. Her memories stirred, the sting of humiliation, the long bus rides home, the notebook scrawled with promises to herself. But she no longer needed his recognition or his regret to define her worth. "You mocked me," she said evenly, her voice steady enough to slice through the noise around them. "But I've built something real, that's what matters." Jake's mouth opened, then closed again. The words he might have spoken dissolved before they could form. His pride crumbled, leaving only silence. Before either of them could say more, a sharp voice called her name. She turned to see a well-dressed man approaching, a potential business partner she had been corresponding with for weeks. He extended his hand warmly. A business partner approaches Kate with a proposal for a joint venture, further solidifying her power. The partner spoke quickly, his excitement genuine. "Kate, I've been looking forward to meeting you in person. I think we're ready to discuss the joint venture we talked about. This could be huge." Kate shook his hand, her composure unwavering, though inside the thrill of the opportunity burned bright. This was more than validation. It was the future expanding before her eyes. Jake stepped back, forgotten in the conversation. He watched as the partner led Kate toward the grand entrance, photographers snapping their every move. The distance between them widened with each step, not just in space, but in every measure of success, ambition and dignity. He lowered his gaze, his shoulders sagging. For the first time, Jake saw clearly not just what Kate had become, but what he had lost. Jake walks away, his head down, realizing he's lost more than just a chance with Kate. It wasn't revenge, it was progress, and I was moving forward. Kate leaned across the conference table, the glow of a city skyline behind her. Papers were spread out before her, charts and forecasts highlighted in bright ink. Across from her sat two entrepreneurs half her age, their eyes shining with the kind of hunger she remembered vividly from her own early days. The deal wasn't about crushing anyone. It wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about building something bigger than she had ever imagined. Signing her name on the investment contract, she felt not triumph over the past, but momentum toward the future. The startup she chose was innovative. Risky, yes, but exactly the kind of venture she was ready to back. Her money wasn't the only thing she brought to the table. She offered strategy, connections, and her growing reputation as someone who made things happen. By aligning with her, the founders gained credibility instantly. News of her investment spread fast. Business blogs ran headlines. Industry peers posted congratulations online. Within weeks, her name was trending in circles she once struggled to even observe from the outside. Her media presence exploded. Invitations arrived from across the country, then from overseas. Conferences in New York, London, Singapore. Leaders wanted her voice on their panels, her story on their stages. She found herself standing under spotlights in ballrooms across the world, speaking not just about branding, but about resilience, risk, and the relentless will to keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Jake lingered in the background, though no longer directly in her life. Mutual acquaintances sometimes mentioned him in passing, how his career had stalled, how his charm no longer carried him as far as it once did. Social media painted an even bleaker picture: half-hearted posts, job changes that led nowhere, silence where there used to be swagger. Kate didn't gloat. She didn't even flinch. His name had lost its power over her. She had no time for ghosts clinging to regret. Her gaze stayed fixed firmly on the horizon. The world kept opening, and she had no interest in glancing back. One afternoon, after finishing a keynote speech in Chicago, she stayed behind to meet with a small group of students who had waited nervously to shake her hand. Their questions were earnest, their notebooks filled with scribbles. As she spoke with them, Kate saw a younger version of herself in their eager faces. That was when she realized mentoring wasn't just an obligation, it was a calling. She began hosting workshops, offering advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, reminding them that their starting point didn't define their ending. Her inbox filled with thank you notes, stories of people who had taken her words and found the courage to act. Her brand expanded beyond borders. She launched programs in Europe, collaborated with companies in Asia, and secured contracts in South America. Each new venture widened her reach, her influence stretching across time zones and languages. What had started as one woman determined to silence a cruel laugh had become a movement others wanted to be part of. Late one evening, she returned to her office after a long flight, the hum of jet lag pulling at her edges. She set down her bag and turned on the light. Stacks of folders waited, each one representing another opportunity, another partnership, another future. Kate smiled faintly. She was tired, yes, but it was the kind of tired that came from building something lasting. As she sat at her desk, organizing papers, a man with a press badge approached cautiously. "Miss Carter?" he asked, his tone respectful but eager. "I've been following your rise for a while now. I'd like to propose something, a full-feature article on your journey." Kate's pen stilled in her hand. A reporter approaches her with a proposal for a feature article on her journey. Something big is on the horizon. For the first time, I was seen for who I really was, not who they wanted me to be. The magazine hit the shelves on a Thursday morning. Kate's face, framed in bold lettering, stared back from the cover of a leading business publication. Beneath her photo was the headline, "From Bus Rides to Boardrooms, the Woman Redefining Success." Her phone buzzed non-stop that day. Friends forwarding photos of the cover, colleagues congratulating her, strangers tagging her on social media with captions like "inspiration" and "game changer." The feature article had gone viral, picked up by outlets across the country, then abroad. For years she had worked in quiet corners, pushing forward without recognition. Now the spotlight was unavoidable. Talk shows requested interviews. News outlets lined up appearances. She found herself under studio lights, microphones clipped to her collar, cameras capturing her every smile and pause, but it wasn't vanity that settled over her. It was relief that the world finally saw her not as the overlooked employee or the woman mocked for taking the bus, but as Kate Carter, a leader who had carved her path through grit and will. Between interviews, she took moments to reflect. She remembered nights spent hunched over textbooks in her apartment, the sting of exhaustion, the cruel laughter that once echoed in her chest. Standing on those stages now, she felt the contrast so deeply it was almost dizzying. Her inbox filled with messages from people who had followed her story, young professionals who saw themselves in her, single parents trying to build better lives, entrepreneurs on the edge of giving up. Their words humbled her. "You gave me hope, your story made me believe I could try again." Each message reminded her that her journey wasn't just about personal victory anymore. It was about the ripple effect, how one act of persistence could spark resilience in others. Meanwhile, Jake's shadow grew faint. He tried reaching out a few more times, short, awkward messages, congratulating her, asking if she remembered the good old days. She never replied. His voice no longer carried weight in her world. The silence she gave him was louder than any Her focus stayed where it belonged, forward. Kate's company thrived as media attention fueled even greater demand. Investors lined up, clients sought her out, and her team grew with each passing quarter. She had built more than a business. She had built credibility, influence, and a legacy in motion. Late one night, she sat in her office, city lights sparkling outside the tall window. She flipped through the feature article again, lingering on a line that quoted her directly. "Success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you can." For the first time, she felt at peace. The ghosts of her past no longer haunted her decision. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even to herself. She was living proof. Then her assistant knocked gently on the door, phone in hand. "You'll want to see this," she said. Kate accepted the call, listening carefully as the voice on the other end explained the offer. "Kate is invited to meet with an international investor. This could change everything. I wasn't just climbing, I was defining the future." The international investor's office overlooked the skyline of Dubai, glass walls gleaming with the reflection of a city that never seemed to sleep. Kate sat across a polished table, her posture straight, her mind sharp. This was no ordinary meeting. The deal on the table had the power to shift her career from national prominence to global influence. The investor spoke with practiced confidence, outlining numbers that made even Kate's experienced pulse quicken. His proposal wasn't small. It was a partnership that would open doors into industries she had only brushed against. Technology, media, education, entire sectors that could magnify her brand beyond personal branding into an empire of influence. Kate listened intently, pen in hand, but she didn't let awe control her. When it was her turn, she leaned forward and negotiated. She questioned terms, challenged projections, and demanded a stake that reflected her value. She wouldn't settle, not after everything it had taken to reach this table. Hours later, the contract was signed. Kate had secured a multi-million-dollar deal that catapulted her company into a new stratosphere. The press release alone sent waves through the industry, her phone lighting up with messages from journalists, peers, and competitors alike. The effects rippled quickly. Her company's valuation soared. Articles labeled her a force redefining the modern business landscape. Conference invitations poured in from continents she had never stepped foot on before. She found herself on flights every other week, her passport filling with stamps that marked her rise not just as an American success story, but as a global one. Jake, though silent now, remained a faint presence on the edges. Once in a while she caught wind of him, an old classmate mentioning he was between jobs, a social media post hinting at struggles he could no longer disguise. He was watching, though, from far away, his world shrinking while hers expanded beyond borders. But Kate didn't dwell on him. She barely thought of him at all. Her life was consumed with strategy meetings across time zones, late-night calls with international partners, and visions of where her company could go next. One evening, she stood on a stage in Berlin, presenting to an audience of thousands. The room erupted in applause when she spoke of resilience, innovation, and the courage to demand more. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled, and she realized something profound. She wasn't just climbing the ladder anymore. She was rewriting the blueprint for those who came after her. Back home, her team celebrated with champagne, toasts ringing out in the office she had once dreamed of. She smiled, but her mind was already on the next step. Global reach was only the beginning. As weeks passed, Plans unfolded, expansions into Asia, partnerships in South America, tech ventures in Europe. She met with government leaders, CEOs, and innovators. Each handshake expanded her reach. Each signature on a contract reinforced her presence as more than a businesswoman. She was becoming a symbol of persistence paying off, of vision outlasting doubt. And then, just when she thought the momentum couldn't climb higher, her assistant rushed into her office with a message. "Kate, you need to hear this," she said, handing her the phone. Kate pressed it to her ear. The voice on the line was measured, careful, but the words that followed made her breath still. "An unexpected call arrives. An offer to purchase her company at an unimaginable price. They thought they could buy me, but I wasn't for sale." The conference room was silent, except for the faint hum of the city beyond its windows. Across the table, 3 executives from a multinational conglomerate sat with practiced calm, their tailored suits pristine, their briefcases heavy with contracts. In front of Kate lay a folder that could change her life in an instant. The number inside was staggering, more money than she had ever imagined having, enough to retire twice over, enough to make headlines across the business world. They wanted to buy her company outright, to fold it into their empire and leave her free, wealthy beyond measure. Kate ran her fingers lightly over the folder, but her gaze didn't waver. She had built this company from a notebook scrawl and a savings account labeled Dream Fund. Every long night, every risk, every vow to prove herself was woven into its foundation. Selling it outright would mean erasing the very heart of who she had become. "I appreciate the offer," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But this company isn't just a number to me. It's a vision, and I'm not willing to sell it." The executive shifted uncomfortably, trying to persuade her. They spoke of legacy, of what the money could provide, of freedom from responsibility. But Kate knew their language well. They weren't offering freedom. They were offering control disguised as opportunity. She smiled politely, closing the folder with deliberate finality. "You can't put a price on what this represents. My answer is no." The rejection echoed louder than any deal. News of the offer spread quickly. Industry insiders whispered about the figure she had turned down. Analysts debated her decision on financial networks. But instead of criticism, admiration poured in. She hadn't just refused money. She had refused to be owned. Kate used the offer to her advantage. In subsequent negotiations, she leveraged the value others saw in her company to secure even stronger partnerships, expanding her influence without surrendering control. Each deal reinforced the message. She was not to be underestimated, and she would not be bought. Her brand became synonymous with empowerment. Articles framed her as a leader who valued vision over cash, resilience over shortcuts. Young entrepreneurs quoted her in interviews, echoing her stance that sometimes the most powerful word in business was no. Meanwhile, Jake made one last attempt to claw his way back into her orbit. A message arrived in her inbox, short, hesitant, uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me." Kate read it once, her lips pressing into a thin line. The words carried no weight compared to the roar of her accomplishments, the empire she had forged without him. She hesitated only briefly, considering what reply, if any, she would give. Kate receives a final message from Jake, asking for forgiveness. She pauses, but her response surprises even herself. "I didn't just build a business. I built a legacy that would outlast them all." The city skyline stretched beneath her office windows, glowing with the golden haze of dusk. Kate stood at the glass, watching the lights flicker on across the horizon, each one a reminder of the people her company now touched. What had begun as a whisper of determination in a tiny apartment had grown into a global powerhouse, an empire with reach far beyond anything she once thought possible. Her business had evolved into something larger than profits or contracts. It had become a platform for change. Under her leadership, the company launched initiatives to support women entrepreneurs, invested in ethical business practices, and funded community programs across multiple cities. She wasn't just creating wealth, she was shaping futures. The recognition followed naturally. Universities invited her to speak, nonprofits honored her for philanthropy, and industry leaders praised her for raising the standard of what it meant to succeed. Yet through it all, Kate remained grounded. She still remembered the ache of humiliation walking home from the bus stop, the hollow sound of Jake's laughter ringing in her ears. That memory didn't sting anymore. It reminded her how far she had climbed. Jake, meanwhile, had become little more than a shadow. Word of him drifted occasionally through old acquaintances, odd jobs, false starts, opportunities that never blossomed. The man who once thrived on being the loudest in the room was fading into obscurity, his arrogance replaced by silence. Kate rarely thought of him, and when she did, it was only with a detached sense of closure. He no longer had any power over her story. Her focus shifted to the generations behind her. She created mentorship programs, offering guidance to young leaders who reminded her of herself, nervous but ambitious, unsure yet determined. Sitting with them, hearing their dreams, she realized her legacy wasn't just the empire she had built. It was the ripple effect of courage she passed on. Her company thrived, revenues surged, new divisions launched, and competitors who once doubted her now scrambled to keep pace. Kate led with a steady hand, insisting on innovation and integrity at every turn. Investors admired her vision, employees respected her leadership, and clients trusted her word. One afternoon, during a global strategy meeting, the board unveiled new projections. The numbers were staggering. Her company was no longer just an industry leader. It had become a global conglomerate, with influence spanning continents, sectors, and markets. Kate's company becomes a global conglomerate, one that even her former competitors can't ignore. The announcement sparked applause in the boardroom, but Kate's reaction was quieter. She smiled, but her thoughts drifted to the journey behind her. The nights of studying, the long bus rides, the humiliations that once made her doubt herself. Every hardship had forged the steel in her spine, the clarity in her vision. Later that evening, she returned to her office alone. Standing by the window, she gazed down at the city her company now shaped. The streets buzzed with life, the lights blinked like stars, and she felt the immensity of her path settle over her. Her legacy wasn't just measured in contracts or profit. It lived in the entrepreneurs she had inspired, the employees she had lifted, the global changes her company had sparked. She had built something that would endure long after her. Kate stands at the top of her building, looking out over the city. Her story is far from over. I proved them wrong, not through revenge, but through my success. The auditorium filled with thunderous applause as Kate stepped down from the stage, the weight of the Crystal Award still firm in her hand. It wasn't just another trophy for a shelf, it was the industry's highest honor. A recognition not only of her business empire but of the ethical leadership that had defined her path. For years she had imagined moments like this, but standing in it now she realized it wasn't about validation, it was about closure. Her company had become a titan, dominating multiple industries with innovation and reach. News anchors introduced her name as synonymous with empowerment. Her speeches were broadcast globally, quoted by world leaders, shared by students, replayed in boardrooms. Success wasn't something she had to chase anymore. It radiated from her, undeniable, unshakable. At home, her family thrived in the shadow of her accomplishments. Her son Noah had grown into a confident young man, ambitious and thoughtful, carrying pieces of her fire in his own dream. She watched him step into opportunities she once thought impossible for herself, and the pride that welled up inside her was deeper than any applause. She had given him more than comfort. She had given him an example. Jake's name surfaced occasionally, whispered in half-forgotten conversations or buried in the background of social media. His career had dwindled into obscurity, a string of attempts that never gained traction. Once the center of attention, he had become a ghost, haunted by choices he could not undo, and by the woman who no longer needed to think of him. Kate didn't feel bitterness anymore. His absence from her life was no loss, it was freedom. Her legacy, by contrast, grew brighter each day. Mentorship programs bore her name. Startups flourished under her guidance. Communities thrived from the initiatives she funded. The world no longer saw her as the woman mocked for taking the bus. They saw her as a symbol of resilience, proof that determination could rewrite any story. At the gala where she received her award, dignitaries and CEOs lined up to shake her hand. Some wanted advice, some wanted deals, others simply wanted to thank her. She accepted their words with grace, never forgetting the nights when she had sat alone in her apartment, whispering vows to herself in the dark. And yet even at the height of it all, Kate felt a steady calm inside. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, not Jake, not the colleagues who once overlooked her, not even to herself. She had won, not by chasing revenge, but by building a life so extraordinary it eclipsed every doubt and insult. Her journey had come full circle. Kate walks into her office ready for the next challenge, her legacy cemented, her future limitless.